So I'd like to bring back to the stage the Director of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, Robert Cardillo.
How are you? Thank you, Keith. Thanks. It's nice to be back. Little setup before we pitch the group. So when I took the job back in October of 2014, I inherited the structure, command structure, pretty much that now DNI Clapper had created. And what a wonderful structure, right? DNI created it. And so, but for me, it was a little flat. Again, DNI is all about clouds and flatness and whatnot. And I just felt, for my skills, and more importantly for my shortcomings, I needed a little bit more of a defined structure. So I created, modified kind of what we, and how we worked in the front office. And we created reinforced the deputy position, stood up a chief of staff, created a director for operations, so think all current provision of NGA value, and a director for plans and programs, think all of our future provisions of value. And I also felt like I could have deep conversations about important challenges that are confronting us with this team. And we call those meetings huddles, and what we're going to do is have one of those huddles here with you. And I'll kick it off by, we're so now enthused by Team GEOINT that we decided you really can't have a team without a uniform. And so, a little risky here, because your mic guy is very nervous about this. These are never before seen nor worn till now. And we just figured, he was right. So here's the display. You got the Team GEOINT on the back. Yes, thank you. And we have Onward on the front, and I'm going to try to move my mic the way I was instructed. Am I audible? Okay. So, thank you, Keith. And for that, we'd like you to be Team GEOINT member number 6.
Thank you very much.
And Jeff, number 7. And the rest of my team, could they please join us out here? And as they get situated, I'll introduce them. There they are. This is the team. Yes, absolutely.
No,
So,
one down, one down, one down, one down.
Oh, no. Oh, yeah. I didn't know you had a chair. I didn't get that whole part. I thought you were standing. Okay.
No, I don't stand.
All right, everybody shift.
Break. No.
Yes, right. Geolocation matters. So sitting to my immediate left is Sue Gordon. Sue is our deputy director of 5 months, 4 months, 4.5 months, something like that. Ed Mornston is our chief of staff, or I also like to call him the chief of stuff, which means pretty much anything that's really, really messy. And so that's Ed's responsibility to make sure all our trains and coal and all that fun stuff. Misty Tullar is the director of plans and program, with a whole week under her belt. Not 6 even days. 6 days. Okay, who's counting? And Jim Griffith, as we call him Griff, is our acting director of operations. We are between our flag officers right now. Some of you know that General Mark Quantock was selected to be our J2 in Afghanistan, and so that had a specific time requirement to do that job, and so Mark is now there serving the nation in Kabul. And soon-to-be Admiral Wyman Howard is coming over from the Joint Staff to be our Director of Operations. Jim has been our Deputy Director, is currently our Deputy Director, and is also our Acting Director of Operations. So, but again, so it's from the far end. If it's current service, it's under Jim's portfolio. If it's future, it's under Misty. If it's messy, it's under Ed. And if it's complicated, it's under Sue. Okay? Boy, that came out well.
Yeah, totally. That was good.
So what do? I give speeches. I approve strategies. I set the course at a broad strategic level. I do, many of you know my background, I continue to simulate being an analyst at least 35 or 40 minutes a day for two reasons. One, I love it and makes me feel valuable as I interact with our senior and junior collection officers, et cetera, and analytic leads and geospatial specialists. But beyond that, most of my day is spent either receiving, documenting, collecting, registering very, very difficult challenges about not today's business, tomorrow's business, our future value proposition. And those usually involve an acquisition, a research and development line, a contractual strategy, et cetera, but they're all quite important and quite difficult. And so I couldn't be more happy to have my lead partner, Sue Gordon, join me, because not only does she handle all those things, and I'll ask her to speak about how much fun that is, but she does it with a deftness and a touch that is, any deputies out there, we should have a deputy seminar, because
We should.
even though Sue knows exactly how hard and how ugly and how complicated it is what I'm handing it, there's always a smile and some sense of gratitude. Oh boy, you know.
Yeah, I'm grateful.
So how do you do that, Sue?
So I thought, since it's a huddle and since you're a part of our team, I'd start by, I think I'd been on the job a week when you had already handed me World Peace and Hunger to solve, and I'm working those. And someone asked me to describe what a deputy does, and I see some people in my demographic group, so my answer was, have you seen the show Mutual of Omaha Wild Kingdom? Right, if you're my age, that's what you did right before World of Disney, is you watched Mutual of Omaha Wild Kingdom. And there were two main players in that show. There was Marlin Perkins, and Marlin Perkins was an adventurer extraordinaire, brilliant, very big picture, always had a place to go and something to do. And then there was another person who was his helper. Now, my memory of this was this line, Marlin Perkins in a helicopter saying, "I'll hover above while Jim below wrestles with a boa constrictor." I'm Jim below. But since then,
I am Marlin, in case you didn't.
well, no, I said the adventurer, the brilliant adventurer, always a place to go. Because I'm
Was it
grateful.
Marlin also in a studio, something like this,
No,
often
he was
too?
in a helicopter. You're good.
But he would start the show, I think,
Kinda like
and he'd lay out the vision and the plan, and we're going to
Yeah.
wrestle tigers and boa constrictors.
Indeed. So now I'm much wiser at 6 months, and sir, you've been asking me to take care of a lot of things, and I thought I'd give you a report
Thank you.
on those in front of our closest friends.
Good.
The first thing is I see my job mostly as gardener, to cite our friend General McChrystal, and your own personal disruptive technology. So think of this as plowing the fields and making sure we're not in ruts. And I'm going to talk some things we've done in a moment, but first let me tell you where I think it starts, and you're going to agree with me. The first place achievement starts is in knowing what you want to do. Right? There is nothing that is good that is going to happen. There is nothing good that we're going to do with you if we are not sure of what we need to achieve. And we a lot of times talk requirements, but too often requirements turn into system specification and then room goes away. We have to be sure of what we need to do. And we've done some things. You see it in the strategy, you see it in your priorities. So we have some guideposts of what we want to do. The second important part of mission is you have to put it in the front of things. So we're going to talk details of what we've done on acquisition tomorrow in a panel. But I would tell you the best thing we're doing on acquisition was we're pushing mission needs up front. Whether that is in how we think about the program that we want to start, the acquisition we want to lead, or the mission needs that we have that will drive how we think about the balance between exquisite national sensors and small sats coming. So step one, sir, is really driving the notion of putting mission first and being absolutely sure about what we need. Step two of that, oh, and what's interesting about that is we had questions yesterday about innovation and risk. I will tell you, when you know what you're doing, it allows room for innovation and it allows for acceptance of risk because you understand the parameters of the value of the accomplishment so you can decide the space you're going to have. So this doesn't feel very tangible to you yet, but I'm hoping that as I talk a little more about things, you're going to start feeling the impact of that. The second thing that we're doing, sir, gratefully, is we're working to measure achievement, not just activity. So there are lots of things we do, and we do those well, and we do great things. The question is, are we getting where we need to go? And what's interesting about when you decide that you're going to measure whether you've achieved something is you must resource things properly. This is also good news for you. And if we find that we've started things that aren't the right things or aren't a path to achievement, we will stop those. But whatever, that combination of mission and measurement of achievement is really an interesting path to freedom, innovation, and risk-taking. So, Gardner. Now the disruptive technology part. I turn out to be an impatient person. You've given me, I'm going to name some of the things that I think you've given me to do, and we'll talk about where we are. Eyesight. So this is important for the entire intelligence community. It's important for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, and NGA has two roles on eyesight. One, we are succeeding brilliantly at. The next, that we are on our path, and both matter to you. The first is we're actually the providers of the common desktop environment. That sounds simple. It is not only complicated, but it's complex. And we're driving that hard, and I'm very proud of what NGA, DIA, and our industrial partners are doing on that. The second part of eyesight is we simply have to get our data into the common stores so it can be used. And quite frankly, geospatial data is a really good foundational set of data. So we are putting large amounts of our content both in the government cloud and in C2S. Why? So it can start to be used. Now, where we collective, as an intelligence community, NGA is no different, are not yet so good at as having applications that can actually act against that data, and especially those data that are now not just a single type. So we're doing well on eyesight, we're committed to it, and we're driving hard in order to not only get more data in and more applications for their use, but there is work for us to do as a collective. Second thing we've done, and this doesn't sound very sexy, but it's great, is we've established a chief data officer. Freedom is one of my things, but if you don't know where your data are, if you don't know what data you have, if you don't know how you want to use it, if you don't know what standards it needs to apply, none of the great things we're talking about. If you want to include Team GEOINT and add more content than your own into the environment, you must understand how it needs to play and act. And I'm not just talking about in narrow confines of our technology offices here. I'm talking agency-wide. You have to be starting to make some decisions about the data you acquire. Made more interesting by this environment where it's not just the data we collect, but the data that is collected and we want to use. So Chief Data Officer is another thing we're doing. Third thing is we'll talk details of acquisition to you, but one of the things that we did up front, and it's kind of in the gardening mode, and that is I sent out an acquisition memo to my entire workforce that said, I want us to use every means that we have available to us, and we have great means, in order to achieve our mission. And if it is available, I want it to be used. And I think we got resounding excitement from both our mission workforce and our acquisition workforce, because it signals to them that we want to go places. Now, here's an interesting thing. You send out a memo that says, I want you to be creative and take risks, and here's what happens. my officers go trundling to my acquisition officers and they say, hey, Sue says we don't have to pay attention to the FAR. Would that I were that powerful. But one, not true. Two, the FAR isn't as limiting as sometimes we think. But three, here's the exciting part. It means that our officers are not being sheeple anymore. When I said I wanted to put mission in front of these things, what I am excited about is someone says, hey, Sue says we can go. Now I'm engaged rather than just throwing an acquisition over the transom to someone to execute. It may be a little misguided right now, but it still is an exciting advance because they're saying, I'm invested in this process. I'm not just waiting for something to happen to me. We're doing interesting things on partnering where you talked about Team GEOINT yesterday. I think there's so much content out there, not only within the NGA realm, but in our NSG partners, State Department, Army Corps of Engineers. If we can help advance their mission and their content acquisition and then make it available for use, that's a good day for us. So we've reached out to them. And then the last thing I'll talk about is GEOINT service. We talked about it yesterday. We ought to expose our content in a way that it can be used. And Justin Poole has talked, you've talked, sir. Here's what's important about that. To me, our role as a service provider provides us with two opportunities. One, to do the right thing, to fulfill our obligation, to unleash the power. And the second is, if we approach the provision of service in a new power way, rather than an old power way, we can use it as a stalking horse for some of the changes we want to see. It is awfully hard to effect change in a system in the abstract, but if we take this responsibility to provide GEOINT services, and we take every piece of it from how you think about content, to the standards, the OGC standards you apply, to the architecture to you use, to the build, develop model, the acquisition models, we can not only climb a hill, but change how we do things in the process of doing something, because that's always the best way. I think there are probably some others, but that's where we are.
So Sue will be holding a seminar, informal though it may be, on how to be an awesome deputy. I think I should hold a seminar on how to select awesome deputies. So the boa constrictors doesn't have a chance. So
Wrestling away.
thank you away. So Keith, you might have a question or two for the huddle.
Indeed, I might. So, again, this may be a first for any conference that we've cleverly tricked about 1,500 people into coming to a staff meeting.
Wait till they see what happens at the end when the taskings get handed out.
That's right.
Right. That's when they run for the... So, Griff, we've got an agency. Robert's talking about it. The agency's talking about it. A requirement to be transparent, a requirement to be open. It is an intelligence agency. As the acting director of operations, how do you balance this openness with the fact that you're an intelligence agency in the business of doing things secretly? And what have you learned? Any unintended consequences thus far?
So how do we balance? Every day the agency, the demand curve for GEOINT, you've heard it from pretty much all of the speakers here, the demand curve for GEOINT goes up. And so we are always looking at the mission and what pieces and parts of the mission we are doing, and generally being flexible enough to shift as we are required to from one mission to another. And from a perspective of being open and transparent, we're always looking at what we're doing and asking ourselves the question, we classified this, did we have to? And so that starts a mindset of, let's look at the lowest possible classification of the things that we're doing, which is important. And then we're learning. Robert talked yesterday about how we have, he asked for the Ebola thing and the big arm movements, and the lawyers said no, and everybody said no, with the intelligence oversight. So as we're learning these things, we're also working on how do we spread the information, the knowledge that we've learned, so that people, when they are more comfortable with doing those kinds of things. We've got a great track record, in particular with humanitarian assistance disaster relief. Admiral Allen talked about the heroic efforts that Director Clapper went to in 2005. Today, a lot of that work is just available online. And that's a huge step forward. And so as we move forward, we've got models of things that work. And so we're trying to build upon those models. And then you start talking about some of the things that we're doing in the classified realm and how we might be more transparent with those. A lot of that gets to what Sue was just talking about in terms of GEOINT services. From our perspective, the content is there. We just need to make it discoverable to people. So as folks, again, that demand curve keeps going up, folks keep coming in and saying, we want more of that. And so we just want to make sure that they can get to it. And then, again, that's that issue of if it doesn't need to be classified way up here, then don't. And that's a cultural thing that we are working on every day.
Two quick things. Remember the days with, 5 eyes? Well, we still have 5 eyes, but we get the memos right for release, right? I question our need to capture the data in a classified way to begin with, right? So one of the frustrating things I had post-Ebola, right? Well, go find my FOUO control officer. Oh, why would we have one of those? Well, we stamped everything with it, and now we can't use it. Well, and then better still for us is the limb disc control officer. Where's he or she? It's all too easy for us to do that at the front end, and then we bind ourselves on the back end. So I'd like to pivot it and say, it's nice and unclassified now. Why don't we just leave it there so we don't have to release it later?
Thank you. So Ed, we saw people right up front in the strategy. And recently as the Director of HD, now as the Chief of Staff, it's sort of easy to say. It's important to say. You're on the hook to kind of make it happen. You want to give us some thoughts on how you're going to execute that?
Yes, Ed.
Sure, I'd love to. So I don't think this falls into the messy category, but it's definitely complex. So we've done a number of things with our people processes and our personnel systems. We now promote people through rank and person, which is a sea-state change for the way we do that. We manage people in career services that are set up by occupations and the type of work they do rather than the directorate that they're assigned to. The directors, our agency's highest priority is to take a very hard look, starting with mission, as Sue mentioned, and making sure that we are aligning our talent to the mission. Something that we have always done, but looking forward will require us to do to a much greater degree than we're currently doing. And then I'd say, when we look at our workforce as it exists today in 2015 and project what we need in the future, let's say through 2021, the program that we are now building and getting ready to submit, we know that the workforce that we have today isn't exactly the workforce that we need going forward. So we have to pay extra special attention to training and development and education. And we're doing that in spades. On Monday, there were at least 2 breakouts talking about data scientists, which is one of those emerging occupations, a work role that's going to be crucial to us in the era of big data and big geospatial intelligence data. But it's not the only one of those. There are at least a handful of new skill sets that haven't been that important to us in the past that we clearly see will be as we go forward. So we've got to ask ourselves, how many of those do we need? Have we identified the skills and the competencies correctly? Where do they need to be placed in the organization? So that's another significant piece of work that the Human Development Directorate is embarking. It's strategic workforce planning at its finest. The other thing is, all of our traditional skill sets aren't going to go away. We still need geodesists and photogrammetrists and R&D technologists and contracts officers and lawyers. So we will not stop hiring them. We will not stop grooming and developing them. But we're hiring many fewer people than we have in the past. We've hired 111 people into NGA this year. That's a relatively small number. Now we'll hire, another 100 as we get to the end of the fiscal year. But it's much different than when we were in the middle of the last decade, where we were hiring, orders of magnitude above that. So every one of those new hires has to matter. We have to get it pretty close to exactly right. And not only in terms of the person themselves, but in terms of the skill set that we need in the workforce. So we're going to pay a lot of attention to that. And it's a significant undertaking.
Thanks, Ed. So, Misty, this question has a special place in my heart, having done future planning and programming on the Army staff and at NGA. Many of us observed in the post 9/11 era that everything got sucked into ops, and if you weren't in ops, you weren't. And so you've got the mantle for this planning and programming piece. What's your strategy to begin to perhaps rebuild and work on the shoulders of your predecessor to put some emphasis back into planning and programming to lead the way forward?
Great. Well, I started with, as you mentioned, Keith, I started with a great foundation. Ellen McCarthy really, my predecessor in this position, really got us off to a good start. I was the NGA CFE until this job a week ago. And I will say I've been very proud of the shift that we have made over the last 3 years and the last 3 budget builds in making that shift from tactical to strategic. In my mind, this is not a nice to have, this is a necessity. We have to step back and take the time, and it takes commitment and it takes dedication, but we have to take the time to think strategically, to set ourselves up at the beginning. As a matter of fact, we've already started on the FY18 program build, as crazy as that sounds, thinking how we're going to approach that from a strategic perspective. Our budgets reflect that. We have made seismic shifts. I can't talk specific dollars, but it is a very large percentage of our budget that we've already shifted from legacy, historical, what got us here capabilities, to quote Robert, to moving us to where we need to go in the future for our strategy. We use the strategy. We use the previous strategy, and we will use this updated strategy as our cornerstone and our foundation, not only for building budgets, but in our daily execution. We need to do a better job of linking those two together. That is one challenge and one opportunity I definitely see in this job to build on what Ellen started. To make sure that when we make the strategic decisions, we actually use that in day-to-day implementation. We've made the shift. I'm very proud of the shift that we have made so far. Sure, there's lessons learned. We could always do things better. I think every year we get better. That's reflected in our planning guidance. That's reflected in our conversations. That's reflected in our portfolio management construct. The mechanism that we're using to build budgets and actually implement and execute our resources. Every year we get better. We could certainly continue to leverage those capabilities in our communication and our strategic thinking, and also thinking outside the box and thinking bigger than where we're at today. But I'm very proud of where we're at so far.
One other bit, Keith, that should give you some hope, all right? That we're going to at least find a better balance. Sue, predominantly with a little bit of help from me, we were able to recruit Peter Heinem, who is currently the director of IARPA. Peter will be joining us in the next few weeks to run Innovision. So those of you who know Peter will know we're betting big on, and as Ed said, that's still our job. As much as we will be more and more dependent upon your innovations and your advancement, we've got to hold our own as well. And so we couldn't be more excited to add Peter to the team.
So that leads into one of the questions that came up, Robert, and I'll throw it out to several of you might have thoughts about this. Is there a role, indeed, for research within NGA? We go on the other side of this wall, phenomenal technologies, both from traditional players in our space and some very non-traditional players, some folks that kind of took a wild flying leap to be at this symposium and to spend precious dollars for a small company maybe to be out there looking for opportunity. And it's exciting on the other side of that wall. What is sort of what's the balance? What are you going to do, and what should they be doing?
So I'll just say briefly and ask Sue to comment and Misty and others, but my view, I spent my time in Innovision, albeit not on the high-end research and development, more like you, right? Plans, programs, ConOps, all that fun stuff that's also necessary. My sense when I came back into the job, Keith, was that, and I know Innovision is short for innovation and, a nice play on words, but quite frankly, it felt too inno and not enough exo. I think, and by the way, I think it's reflective too of what we talked about with the analytic workforce, right? We were raised in a culture with we not only can do it ourselves, we must do it ourselves, right? Security, specialized methodologies, intricate controls and all that. I do think that we have to go through kind of a reopening to what's behind those walls on the other side. And it isn't an either-or proposition. It's an and, but again, that's my intent, is that we open those doors more, and we've charged Peter with doing that. But Sue?
That was a great answer, and you almost didn't leave any space, and yet I'll find some. On the Peter and on that you need to do things internally, I do think the government needs to have doers and great talent. You can't just cede things to someone else with no ability to adjudicate what is there. So whether you do a balance, whether you do some internally, some externally, you do have to have an internal core of true expertise to either generate the ideas or adjudicate the goodness. I also think I couldn't agree more, it was so exciting walking around out there, but there is work to be done. I'll offer a couple. And work that I think comes from the ideas that happen when you live with the problem. We need more work on data acting on data. We need more work on how you take the automation that is so exciting to be able to deal with massive amounts of data in a way that we can't see it, but introduce it into true humans, how they think of things, rather than just viewing it as it's an answer. We still need to develop analytic tools that work not from a known, as in most of the counterterrorism work, but from a true unknown when you don't know where to start and how do you let the data reveal that. And then I would say for an organization that is dependent on and dedicated to transparency, we are going to, as a collective, be drivers of cybersecurity in interesting ways, because if you're closed, you have lots of means to protect yourself. When you insist on being open, then those things that you need to also protect become interesting drivers. So I guess my way of saying is, for all the brilliance that is out there, and oh my goodness, I could just do that. There is still room for the mission to be able to think of the things it needs done and then have enough expertise in order to be able to say, well, here are the kinds of things we see.
Thanks. So, Misty, this is interesting, and I'll paraphrase, but it says sort of something to the effect of the senior leadership team, probably the next level down, emotionally invested in portfolio management, right, by definition. How are we going to connect it to someone, down at executing, right? How do they understand where their piece fits and how what their work does bubbles up to support a portfolio direction? I think it's a great question.
It is a great question. Can't say it wasn't anticipated. In a large organization like this, where lots of people can or cannot make decisions, it is hard to connect with that individual, if you will, in the kind of the execution level. I think day-to-day continued implementation of the portfolio management process. I think making decisions that changes the way we do current business, current capabilities, whether it's a contractual change, whether it's a funding change, whether it's a personnel change, that will wake people up, if you will, that we are serious about portfolio management, that this will work, this is the right thing for NGA to do and to execute. But until we make that change that impacts at an individual level, I think it will be hard to get people to capture their attention. But hopefully what people will start to see is the goodness that we're trying to draw from it. And if you will, the shortcomings that we had before in terms of how we were approaching this massive organization and this massive set of resources in a better way, once they see how that is being implemented, the proof is in the pudding. We have to come through on this and show that the decisions that we're making and the process we're putting in place are actually working. So I view the onus being on us to prove it to the individuals that this is the right way and the right path to go. And hopefully with that, then they will join our team and understand why we're doing what we're doing. But we need to make those individual connections.
Keith, if I can add, I agree with the assumption that the question that the top leadership and the next level down are bought in. But I think what's really important for folks to know is that the ops and mission folks the leadership are bought into this process as well. So not only are they in some cases also the portfolio manager, but they understand that once we get transparency in our workforce, once we get transparency on where our resources are and what we're spending them against, we're going to need to show them. There's a communications piece where we tell them, take a look at the director's priorities, take a look at what we're investing in, and there's a clear tie between that. But what they're going to start seeing is we've made a decision, a conscious decision, not just was made at a division level kind of thing. We've made a conscious decision corporately that we're going to get out of this piece of the mission. We're just not going to be doing that. And it doesn't mean that mission is not going to get done, but with that transparency, what they'll also start seeing is our partners. So we'll be able to, in a knowledgeable way, engage with both our commercial and mission partners to say, hey, you're doing something like this anyway. We're going to take your product, and it gets back to the classification, it gets back to trust. There's some other pieces there, but I think it's that support that the senior ops leadership has in this process and the understanding of what it will deliver for the agency that's going to ultimately make it successful.
So there's an interesting number of questions on the desktop environment. Who knew it would be so exciting? But if this holds, there's a lot of interest in the desktop environment and where you are in the movie. How is it coming along? What's coming?
It's hard.
I just thought I'd try it.
Oh, yeah.
Works for you.
Yeah, my desktop's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are so many bets that we've made with eyesight. One is efficiencies, and one is capability. A lot of the efficiency is doing in common what can be commonly done, and desktop is one of those. But you have to commit. There is little desktop, and the service that goes with it is people hold so dear and have such particular opinion about. But we are, I think, almost 30,000 people, actual humans, between several organizations that are on the common desktop, and the free world has not ended. And they are able to work every day. So it's coming. Over the next year, I believe that number will grow to, say, 75,000, and we'll just go from there across 9 agencies, and you'll just keep going. So this is a really cool beginning. It is, however, just a beginning. What has to happen is we need more application. We need the apps mall to continue to explode in terms of use, and there's a new version out there that is spectacular, and more applications being put in. But it is a large endeavor when you make the decision that you were going to do common things across organizations, but it is one more piece of evidence that the stovepipes are coming down.
So there's a good question here about the GEOCOM. You're changing how you're involved with the community. You're changing your perspective on how you want to lead the NSG, and that results in some changes to the GEOCOM. Could you just talk about that and how that
Sure.
fits?
So those of you who don't know, I've got two jobs. Spoke mostly about the director of NGA job. The other job is to functionally manage the discipline for the Department of Defense and the government. And so I do that with my functional management hat on. Keith mentioned the GEOCOM, or Geospatial Intelligence Committee, that I sit at not as the director of NGA, but as the functional manager. And I have an NGA tent card, and somebody else sits there. And that's my service brothers and my departments and agencies and throughout the government who come to that forum. And, I kind of feel that during the time in which we all were on the receiving end of the post 9/11 surge, and I don't mean the troop surge, the dollar surge, right? That and look, I had 3 or 4 key jobs during that time, and when you're on the receiving end of that funds, your head's down, because oh my goodness, I have this much more money, I've got to move this much more contracts. I know you guys love that, but it takes work. Oh, I have this many more people come in, how do I get them oriented? Oh my goodness, I can't even sit them in the place, you know what I mean? And so it's a head down mentality. We all know that's over. One of the benefits, of the end of such a surge is that heads are up now and hands are out rather than elbows. And I want to use, and by the way, I'm kind of coming late to this in my 9th month. That is to say, the GEOCOM to me feels poised and ready to say yes. We're ready to, enforce and enact the standards. We're ready to, and by the way, I'm a big believer in mission share, vice burden share, because that's really what it is. I think much more openness to that. So as one, so Jimmy Green, who was my most recent senior director for this responsibility, we've moved him to another significant job that Ed talked about, leadership development. I have purposefully solicited for candidates from throughout the community. And I am very, very pleased to include this morning of another nomination that I'm getting from outside. Now, I haven't decided if, I'm going to choose the best candidate. Could be an NGA senior, but it could well be a service senior. But my point is that that's my outside job, and there are certain benefits to having an outside perspective in that seat. But everything I talked about yesterday with Team GEOINT reflects to this group especially. And I think there is such power, and now as Sue, through eyesight, gets the plumbing corrected, right? Simple things like desktops or faucets, actually work together now. There's this attitude and there's this commitment. So a long way to say I'm looking to take advantage of what I think is a population that's poised to move forward together.
So Griff, Ed, you might have some thoughts on this as well. Questions about how things are going in Denver, right? So, there was a memo signed by then DNI McConnell and ONIR, the thing that was named for what it wasn't, brought back into the GEOINT realm, and NGA taking a great footprint in Denver alongside with partners from the community. How's that maturing from an operational perspective?
So I think we are learning a lot from that operation. The collaboration that goes on out in Denver is becoming much more natural to all of the players from across all of the agencies and organizations that are out there. And it's really more than just intelligence agencies. We've got space folks out there and all sorts of other activities going on, and they're all learning how they can advantage each other. I will tell you though, it's not easy work. So there's great leadership out there from all of the agencies and organizations, and they get together regularly and they talk about what's hard. And when something doesn't work quite right, they're focused on getting it fixed, so they get engaged rapidly, and I know Ed knows that a lot more personally than I do, but they get engaged rapidly, and they've made agreements about how they're going to operate, and so when somewhere in the workings of that doesn't quite work out, they get engaged and get that fixed. And I think most importantly, some of the work they're doing, they have a collab zone out in Denver. That collaboration zone is actually a best practice that we're trying to figure out how to bring into NCE and NCW to begin with. They have several cells out there where they've combined all the various ints and they're talking all the time. We're looking at how do we connect that to the rest of the GEOINT enterprise, not just in Denver, but we want not only that feeling of collaboration, but the processes, the things they're doing, and they're mostly connected in chat rooms. So it's not like there's a big technology hurdle here. We don't need to wait for all the plumbing because most of the plumbing we need is there on all the domains. So they're doing great work out in Denver. Still challenges, but they're doing great work. So Ed?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You know, it's a energizing, fantastic place to work. The question that I always had out there was, can we make it scale? And can we export the magic that happens inside the aerospace data facility to other parts of the enterprise? And that remains hard, but it remains something, you know, that's some of what Griff was talking about. But another measure of success, I think, is, at least for the NGA people that I'm familiar with who work out in Denver, they are the thought leaders and the action takers and the people who are actually achieving much of what we are talking about in our strategy and in other places. So when we're working on next-gen collection or advanced analytics or wireless or moving to the cloud, many of the people who are in the forefront of that for NGA either are currently assigned in Denver or were previously. So that's a great measure of how things are going, I think.
So as I move into what will be our last question, I'd like to put you on the spot and have you commit that you will take these questions that we've not gotten to and post them somewhere within some reasonable amount of time. I'll take that as a yes. There was also a suggestion in there.
I bet she's smiling.
There was also a suggestion in there that perhaps all your future huddles are held in the Alder Auditorium. And that you could invite 600 or so people to join you. So lots of interest in future staff meetings. Last question was about the RFI for NextView and where we're going moving forward with commercial imaging. Lots of buzz here Monday and yesterday with respect to the proliferation of different ways to sense, different phenomenologies, different approaches, different constellations, manned, unmanned, space. So it seems to have looked relatively simple in the past, and it looks remarkably complicated in the future.
Yeah. So as I think about, you know, where we need to go with our acquisition of, and I'll say service at the top level, I'll say there's two buckets. Sometimes when I say there's two things, I think of a third in the middle, so stand by. But clearly, you know, to Griff's point, to Ed's point, we have a fundamental responsibility to enable the Navy to safely navigate as we speak. And there are U.S. Air Force planes that are precisely targeting as we speak. And that doesn't always come, you know, to the fore, and, you know, when I'm waving my arms about, you know, small sats or whatnot, and, you know, reinventing a new procedure, we need to be mindful that that's all there. So I can only imagine, Keith, going forward, that I will still be dependent upon this room for the acquisition of technology, of brain power, right, and of data right? Data that you all will develop or acquire or perfect, and I'll just be the recipient of it. And so we'll write those checks. And so let's not forget that. On top of that, and you asked about next for you and whatnot. That was considered and approved and developed and competed and awarded, right? Some time ago. And I don't know if I can say this without any qualification, but I got to tell you, the U.S. government and the NGA, there's very few things for which we've received more value back, okay, than that contract. So I don't want to leave anybody to think, oh my goodness, he's somehow dissatisfied. So hugely valuable. I think it's a great deal for the American people and taxpayer, et cetera. But the point is that we set that condition up some time ago. And we need to think hard about what that value proposition and what that, in this case, contract proposition is going forward. I think our future is going to be a mix. I think we're going to need the fundamentals that I talked about. I think we'll at some level be in the pixel procurement business. I think that part of our business will reduce over time. I think we'll move from procurement, leasing, renting, borrowing, sharing, bundling, I don't know, some other arrangement. And then I think the growing part of our relationship will be on the so what side. How are you manipulating? How are you presenting? And Sue talked about the magic that we're seeing out in the hall. And I'll just add to Sue's comments that I think one of the things we owe you more is mission context for your apps. It's interesting, when I did the Centers for Academic Excellence the other day, we asked them, what's missing and what would you like to have more of and what do you wish you learned in college, Boy, if I only knew why we were doing that research, if I only knew what the application of my engineering code was, if I only, et cetera, et cetera. Well, look, that's all of our challenge. That's, we're constantly trying to get to that consequential moment so that you can be motivated and energized and enthused. So back to your question, I think we can do a better job of exposing that to you all, right? So that you can do a better job of taking the engineering wizardry, taking the innovative approaches, and making that last turn, which doesn't matter none of it matters if we don't get this last turn, which is, and it does what for that mission, and it answers, which intelligence question, and it reveals what threat, et cetera, et cetera. So I know you asked a smaller question there, and you were looking for maybe a smaller answer, but I felt I owed you that context, Keith.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
If no one has anything else to add, I want to thank you very much for this insight into your huddle. Thank you all for being shanghaied into this staff meeting. And thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Tomorrow.
Right.
Thank you. That was good. Cool. Thank you.